All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for our latest installment of our Ask the Broker session. My name is Joseph Miranda, broker and owner of Miranda Executive Realty. Before we jump into this too much, let's go ahead and hit you with our ever so popular shameless plug. If you're an agent joining us from another brokerage, or if you're an agent in our brokerage and want to share our information, you can just scan on the QR code and somebody will reach out to you and tell you more what Miranda Executive Realty can do for you. Real quick before we jump into it as well, quick disclaimer, I'm a broker. This disclaimer is actually very important for this training because I'm going to be talking about legal documents. I am the broker and owner of Miranda Executive Realty. I am not an attorney, an accountant. I'm not a financial advisor. I am only a broker of a real estate company trained in sales of real estate. I've been doing this for a long time, but that, time, as you know, in real estate doesn't necessarily equate to experience. I believe I have the proper experience to be training these documents, but before making any decisions or advising your customers, I encourage you to make sure that you just verify everything that I'm telling you here and seek proper legal counsel if need be. So jumping into it today, this is, in my opinion, one of the hardest trainings that we've put together. And the reason being is because it's on contracts, riders, and addenda. Now today is on riders and addenda, but if you've been selling real estate for any amount of time, what you know is that these things are always changing. They're always changing the verbiage of contracts. They're always changing the verbiage of riders. They're always adding, subtracting. So today is October 28th, 2025. What we are teaching today is relevant to the contracts and riders today. But if you're watching this in the future, you're going to want to double check and verify the information because they change quickly and often. We just don't, they give notice, but we don't always, catch that notice. So, and as you can see from the GIF here, this is how I feel normally when looking at contracts and riders. So, that being said, questions, comments, whatever you may have, please, if you want to put them in the chat box, I'll answer them as soon as I can. Otherwise, if you want to just write them down, you can also save them for the end of this training. So what do we always talk about in real estate, or what do we always talk about in this office? We talk about your 20%, right? We talk about the things, the jobs of a real estate agent, right? What is your job as a real estate agent? It is this right here. It's lead generation, lead follow-up, going on appointments, writing, negotiating contracts, and closing those sales. Today, we're on step number 4 because you're going to be writing and negotiating contracts. The better you understand these contracts, these riders and addenda, the more likely you are that you're actually going to get these things closed because you are consulting and advising with the customer to understand what it is that they are agreeing to, right? So what we're trying to do is take the guesswork out of contracts, riders, and addenda. Hopefully give you a couple of little tips and tricks. If you caught our training that we did last week, you'll know, you should be up to speed and you'll know where we left off on the as-is contract. Everything that we're going to be talking about today is going to be for the Florida FAR bar as-is contract, right? That's what we're talking about today. So, all right, jumping ahead here. So where do riders and addenda start, right? Riders and addenda start on page 11 of 13 of the FAR bar as is contract. It starts on this page right here. Every time I fill out a contract for a buyer, when I get to this page, I stop and I read through every single one of these riders. Right, it's funny they say addenda on here, but they're all actually labeled as riders, right? But I go through both. I go through every single checkbox on here, and I check every rider that is applicable to this contract. And this requires us to have the knowledge of when to use any rider, the knowledge of different riders that may be similar but they're not the same. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So and then just kind of a quick thing, a quick link to help you. We've got a QR code here if you want to save this website. This is Florida Realtors. This is forms descriptions. So if you want to go through and really, deep dive into some of these, some descriptions are longer than others, but this also gives you a brief description of each of these forms and more, actually. So you can, you can kind of figure that out. So what's the difference between a rider and addendum or addenda, right? We actually have, I think we've got quite a bit of contracts that we can use in the state of Florida, whether you want the FAR bar, you want to use the FAR, whether you want to use the one that's with beaches. A lot of the different local associations, they have their own, contracts and riders that you can use. You do not, the number one thing that you need to know is do not mix and match contracts and riders. They can be contradictory to each other, right? So make sure that you're using the proper rider with the proper contract, right? So the Florida contract is going to be the contract for residential sale and purchase, right? And each of those riders, you're going to use it's going to be a crisp rider. The one that we're talking about today, because it's the one that we come across most frequently, is the as is, right? So as is means, as is with right to inspect. That doesn't mean that a customer cannot inspect the property. That doesn't mean that based on that inspection, they couldn't actually ask for repairs. That just means that they're writing it as is at the moment, right? All of the riders for as is are going to be CR, right? Just think of comprehensive rider, right? CR, comprehensive rider, not, CR in the CRISP contract is contract residential, but for the as is, all of your riders should have a CR on them. So that's just a quick trick. Just make sure as is, CR, comprehensive rider. If you do that, then likely you are probably using the correct rider, right? Another quick QR code, quick link to the 2025 Florida statutes, right? Save that, read through it, nerd out. You're all good. All right, so jumping ahead here. So we're going to attempt to get through every single rider in the next 50 minutes. Hopefully we can get through it. So CR7, comprehensive rider, A through GG. Some of them we're going to skim through and go through very, very quickly. And then other ones, we're going to spend a little bit more time on them. So what is rider A? Right, rider A is maybe one of the more difficult riders that you come across in in real estate, but it's also maybe also one of the most common ones that you're going to run into as well. We're using a little bit different format today, so just try to follow along with us here. A and B are going to be where we start. So condominium rider A, right? So we'll highlight some of the important areas here. Again, I mean, a lot of these are self-explanatory: seller, buyer, seller initials. Management company is actually very important. One thing I would say on this one is it really should be the listing agent having the condominium rider filled out first and given, you can put it on, an attachment in the forms on the MLS. You can email it ahead of time. But really the listing agent should be the one filling this out, because this is information that needs to be filled out by the listing agent. Imagine a buyer's agent's filling this out, and when the buyer's agent fills this out, they don't have the association or management company information. They don't know if the association or members of the association have right of first refusal. Well, what happens now when a buyer fills this out and they just make it up, and then the seller has to come in and make changes? Well, now you need what? You need initials, right? Because it's changed. Imagine if the buyer got it all right, but they didn't have the management company's information, and the seller filled out the management company's information and sent it back. Well, now you need initials, right? So any documents that are going to require the seller to fill them out up front, such as the condominium rider, because it's knowledge that maybe the seller knows that maybe the buyer doesn't know. That's something that, like, when you go on a listing appointment, if it's a condo, take these with you and get these filled out ahead of time, and then just attach them in the MLS and put it in the broker remarks that, you know, condo writer is attached in the MLS. But it's good practice to do that, because once that document is changed, then you need to get initials from the other side, you know, confirming that they've received and acknowledging those changes, right? Kind of scrolling down, you know, a little bit here to the next page, you know, fees, assessments, prorations, you know, make sure that these numbers are right? Confirm this with the seller. Sometimes what happens is they'll change in the course of the listing, right? You know, the monthly assessment for the association might change. So, you know, that's one that I've seen people get caught up in the past, that when those change in the middle of a transaction or in the middle of a listing, and then it doesn't get updated, it becomes an issue when they get to the interview and they verify it, and then the agent comes back and, you know, they're yelling about it, they're upset, but, you know, really it's something that changed. Paragraph 3C, special assessments. So this is the one, you know, the as-is contract talks about special assessments as well, but that's municipal assessments. Those are assessments that are levied by the public body. These are the assessments that are levied by the association, or you know, and they're enforced by the management company. So when people talk about assessments, this is generally the one that you're talking about. And generally speaking, especially now, because assessments have been such a big thing, seller does pay those in full prior to closing, right? I mean, I guess you could argue it, but a lot of associations, and check with, you know, every association is going to be different, check with them, but a lot of associations will require that you cannot turn over property to somebody else without that being paid in full. So, you know, just keep that in mind. Quick change, or quick question: how many days does a buyer have to review the condominium documents, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, rules and regulations? Does anybody know how many days they get to review those documents? Used to be 3 days, right? But well, if you go to the next page, at the top of the condominium rider, they changed it. It's now 7 days. The buyer now has 7 days to review all of these condominium documents, right? All of them stated here: declaration of condominium, articles of incorporation, bylaws, rules and regulations, so on and so forth. They have 7 days. So, you know, it used to be, okay, you know, get them to the buyer quickly. Well, now, to me, get them to the buyer even faster. So when I'm a listing agent, I want to have these documents, you know, kind of geared up, ready to fire off at a moment's notice, right? Because once we get under contract, I want to get them out, right? Because they get 7 days now from the receipt of all of the documents. If you forgot to give, if as a listing agent you forgot to give the articles of incorporation to the buyer, and then you're 6 days from closing, and they say, hey, we didn't get the articles of incorporation, and they ask you for it and you give it to them, now any term inside those articles of incorporation is a potential to give them a legitimate cancellation and receive their full deposit. So just know that now. It's 7 days. It's no longer 3 days. And the reason I think that it's 7 days instead of 3 days is if we scroll down to paragraph 6, if you see everything else that we need to collect as well, it's a lot. And these are confusing, even still today, confusing management companies. Because if you call a management company and you reach out, I need the minutes of condominium association board meetings for the last 12 months. I also need the minutes of condominium association member meetings for the last 12 months, right? Well, what's the difference? Usually you're only going to get one, right? So, you know, make sure very early on when you have a listing that you start working on these and see, do they have separate minutes for the board and the members, right? Or is it just, you know, one meeting that they hold? Maybe they don't hold separate meetings. But make sure as a listing agent that you know this and have this pre-filled out, right? Because, you know, maybe there's no member meetings. Maybe it's just board meetings. Maybe there's no board meetings. Maybe there's just member meetings. Maybe there's both. I don't really know. I've never lived in a condo. So, you know, but just make sure that all of these documents as well, you have these ready to collect. They've already collected, and have those ready to fire off, right? If you're a buyer's agent, I've seen buyer's agents, they just check every box. I don't even think they know what they're asking for sometimes, right? And again, they reiterate down here in the red box, cancel within 7 days, right? Oh, and also, let's see. It used to say that this agreement, the buyer cannot, these rights cannot be waived, rights to inspection. They changed it a little bit. I believe what they're saying now is buyer's right to void this agreement shall terminate at closing. Right. So, you know, I think what that means is, you know, that they can't waive it. This doesn't go away until closing. Once closing happens, you know, I believe the reason that they changed this is because it used to say the buyer cannot waive these rights, and probably something happened post closing, and they would say, hey, wait a second, I didn't get my articles of incorporation, and then they start giving a problem, right? Well, now it says it terminates at closing, but only at closing. So the buyer couldn't even, in additional terms on the as-is contract, in my opinion, say that I'm waiving my right to receive these documents, because they can't be waived. You can't waive your rights. You have to receive these documents as a buyer. Now, if you don't receive them and you close, right, everything's funded, everything's transferred, we're all done, then I don't think you could really have an argument, because now it terminates at closing. But I believe there probably was an issue somewhere down the road. And then the fund goes on, right? You know, paragraph 7, make sure you know the parking space number. Jumping down to paragraph 9, right? Now we've also got to get milestone inspection reports, and we've also got to get structural integrity reserve reports, right? These, you know, turnover report. So turnover report is for work that is, it's either going to be new construction after July 1st, 2023, or if a substantial project was done, right? Milestone, structural integrity. These are two things that have recently come up. We've been reading a lot about these. We've been reading a lot. Milestone is your, what is the milestone? Is your, I think it's every 30 years. And then the structural integrity, I believe, is every 10, or it's vice versa, the other way around. I don't really remember. Okay, it looks like I got that right. Thank God. So, you know, make sure that you're also getting these documents. There's a lot of documents now. So if you're a listing agent, start getting them early, because what's going to happen is there's going to, you know, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. And all of these documents, they're allowed to, you know, they're going to have their time to inspect it. Now, what if you can't get it? What if you can't get it? What if it's not done, right? What if the milestone inspection just wasn't done? What if the structural integrity report just wasn't done? Well, they've thought of that. It's going to be the third box, right? It is required, right? But has not completed such report, right? So you can still check that box. But if you're the listing agent and you know this, don't make your life hard, right? Don't make your life hard and let the buyer's agent fill this out. You already know this. Get ahead of that problem. It's right there. Okay, now go read it up in the in the forms on the MLS, right? Download that and attach that to the contract, because they already filled it out correctly, right? Listing agents, fill these documents out with your seller, right? And have your seller have already initialed it. It's fine. If you don't want them to initial it, that's fine too. They can come back with the offer and they can initial it then. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in, but make sure that as a listing agent, you're filling these out. Buyer's agents, in my opinion, should not be filling these out, right? You know, scrolling down a bit more, same thing, right? This agreement is voidable by a buyer by delivering written notice of buyers within 7 days, blah, 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 right? 7 days to what? To inspect all of these other reports. It's a lot of time that you're giving somebody that, you know, you've got 7 days to inspect. If during that first, you know, the property inspection, if during that first 7 days on the property inspection, you don't give these, right? What if you take 5 days to give them? Well, now they get 12 days to inspect, right? 5 plus the extra 7 days that you just gave them by giving them these late. Doesn't make sense, right? An inspection actually less than a week at this point wouldn't even matter, because they could still back out based on any of this, in my opinion, right? Consult with an attorney. But if you have 7 days to inspect, you have 7 days to inspect. So a 3-day property inspection, cool, we did the property inspection, but you can still cancel within 7 on any of these. Condos only, right? Keep in mind, these are only condos. And milestone SIRS, those are 3 stories and taller, right? So 2 stories and below, those are not going to apply. Homeowners associations, jumping ahead to rider B. Homeowners associations are a little easier, right? But again, you really should, as a listing agent, have this filled out ahead of time. There's no reason not to, right? So, you know, just keep these in mind, you know, but you have now an inspection time frame on the association, right? So make sure you're understanding these things, right? That you understand these are now additional inspection time frames, and this stuff is changing so fast. This stuff is changing so fast. Laws in Florida are changing so fast. How they apply to anything that has an association, those laws are changing so fast. So make sure you're on top of that, right? So just make sure that you're paying attention to these things, right? Assessments, right? Make sure you're getting the assessments right. Fill that out, and again, same thing. If it changes during the listing time frame, then you need to be aware of that, and this needs to be updated. The last thing you want is for somebody to have a surprise that, you know, the monthly assessment went up between the time they got it under contract to the time that it closed, or it went up from the time that you had it listed, because listings are sitting on the market for quite a while too, right? Rec leases. Is there a rec lease? Should know that, right? Association approval, right? Is it required? Might be required, may not be required. Land leases. Yeah, coming back here to land leases. Is there a land lease? That caught up people before. You know, sometimes there's, you know, buildings that are on a land lease that's still owned by the developer. Seller should know that, right? And if the seller doesn't know that, it's okay to call the management company, right? That it's totally okay to call the management company. If you don't have the management company, well, it's a perfect time to get it, so that when you get to page 3 and it asks you for the management company's information, you can go ahead and fill that out, right? Again, assessments, you know, all of these things. Make sure it's disclose, because once they get to the interview, if it wasn't disclosed, you got a problem, right? How it's handled, what happens from there, I don't know, but you don't want that, right? All right, so the next riders that we have here, C, D, E, F, and G. We're just going to go through these somewhat quickly, because they're a little bit more simple, a little more common or less common, right? Seller financing. Seller financing is C. Seller financing does not happen in many cases, right? A lot of times it's something that comes up as part of a conversation. If you've ever, you know, if you're working with buyers, you've been doing this for a while, you know, they do talk about it. But you know, Dodd-Frank, you know, as referenced here, it's all about financing, right? The Dodd-Frank law that passed, it's all about financing. So you need to make sure, if you're seller financing, that they understand the law and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. So if your seller is considering financing, make sure they read this, make sure they understand it. I highly recommend employing an attorney at that point to help with the mortgage and make sure that everything is really on the up and up. This basically lays out the framework for the mortgage right here. On the next page, it talks about, you know, first mortgage is, you know, so basically, are you financing the entire thing? Is it a second mortgage, right? You know, what's the interest rate going to be? What's the term? right? Is it balloon? Is it adjustable? Like, this kind of lays out the framework of what that is going to be. Similar to how a contract to lease lays out the terms of the actual lease. This right here is going to lay out the terms of the actual mortgage. But then this is not the mortgage, right? You still need somebody to draft a mortgage, and the mortgage would need to be, delivered by the mortgagee, so mortgagor. So, right. The assumption of existing mortgages. Don't see many of these either. This also is something that comes up quite a bit in the conversation, but it doesn't really, in my opinion, or from my experience, it doesn't really happen very often. Just keep in mind that, it's assumption of the existing mortgage, so it's not a new mortgage. So the new, the buyer needs to actually still qualify under the same terms of that mortgage. Number one, it needs to be assumable. Number two, they need to qualify. And number three, they can only assume what's left. If there's a 30-year mortgage and there's 21 years left, that's all you're assuming, right? But you do get the benefit probably of that lower interest rate. But how valuable is that? I don't know, because, if you bought it 9 years ago, it was a very different market. So the mortgage is probably a lot lower amount. Even if the interest rate is lower, they still have to get the additional mortgage on top of that to bridge the difference, unless they're going to pay cash or whatever. But that money's got to come from somewhere. So I don't see a lot of assumption of mortgages. All right, FHA, VA, rider, rider E. This one, so this is FHA and VA. So number one, you're only going to check the box on 3 or 4. That's the first thing. So we see these where people, I don't know if they just like to check boxes. They don't know what the heck they're doing. I don't know. They don't read things. God forbid, somebody's filling out a contract and they're not reading it. But 3 and 4 are not the same thing. 3 is FHA, 4 is VA, right? So make sure that you're actually reading the contract. You have a VA or FHA buyer. Either of this is a required document for VA or FHA, because there's verbiage in here that's required by the mortgage company, the loan company. So make sure that that you do that. Paragraph number 2, inspections. Do you want to cap that? Do you want to put something there? Paragraph number 3. So coming back to paragraph number 3. You do have a little appraisal contingency there, right? So that's usually going to be the purchase price. Put whatever you want there, I guess. I don't know, but I don't know why you would put any number besides the purchase price. Maybe there's a reason why, maybe not, but make sure you put a number there. Why? Because there's no if left blank then kind of area. So the biggest thing to me, though, the thing that we see the most, you don't check that you're not getting FHA and VA financing. You're getting FHA or VA financing. So just make sure on that one that what your customer is getting, and then you go from there. All right, F, rider F. So let's jump back to the slides real quick before we go to rider F, appraisal contingency. So a lot of people believe that your mortgage gives you an appraisal contingency. I don't believe that's actually true, right? Not the way that I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, I don't do mortgages. I'm only a real estate broker. But an appraisal contingency in the mortgage, right here, it protects the lender, right? So the appraisal contingency that we're about to talk about protects the buyer. So not necessarily, if you have a mortgage and the property doesn't appraise, your buyer couldn't necessarily say, well, there's an appraisal contingency there that we can cancel this contract, right? They would maybe just have to pay the difference. Now, the way that the lender would issue a denial letter is if the buyer doesn't have enough money to bridge the difference, right? To make up the difference between the appraisal and the actual purchase price. But what if your buyer does have that money? What if your buyer is actually able to bridge that difference? Well, there's an argument there that your buyer may not actually be protected under that, right? Because they couldn't be denied for insufficient assets, right? So if your buyer that's getting a mortgage wants to get an appraisal contingency, you can still do that. And rider F, appraisal contingency, is the means by which you would do that. Kind of a double caution. Now, most lenders are willing to issue a denial letter based on the appraisal not coming in, but they would have to do that based on insufficient assets. So with a mortgage, if your buyer wants to do one, they could do that. And in either case, even if I'm wrong, there's nothing wrong with double protecting your customer, right? Paragraph G, short sale contingency. By now, we probably all know what short sales are. Short sales became, very, very popular during, the 2008 to about 2012. I think they kind of continued on to 2013, so on and so forth. Initially, lenders really had no idea how to manage a short sale. It was like the Wild West. But since then, they've really kind of streamlined it and figured out how to do them in a fairly efficient and effective way. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on short sales. But if you have a buyer, just know that a short sale rider does exist, and you probably should fill this thing out accurately, right? All right. H. So again, kind of rush through some of these. H, J, M, N, and O. We're just going to go through these, somewhat quickly. So, all right, H is homeowners flood insurance. So this is kind of an insurance rider or an insurance contingency, right? If your customer is not sure, right? Like, let's say the roof is really bad and it's old, or I don't know, they suspect that it's going to have some issues with insurance. There's no wind protection, right? Well, you can write this in here that that it's going to be so much of as a percentage for homeowners insurance, or a dollar amount, right? Or flood insurance, right? So basically, this is going to give them the right to kind of write in their number, right? Buyer is unable to obtain homeowners insurance coverage from a standard carrier or citizens at the first year. Premiums not to exceed, $4,000 or 5% of the purchase price by what date? If left blank, then the earlier of 30 days, right? Or 10 days, whatever. So you can kind of write in. So if maybe a buyer's numbers are really tight, and the lender says, well, we can get this done based on, this number, then I don't know, maybe put it in there. Or if the buyer is just really concerned about insurance, this is a homeowner flood insurance contingency, right? So this would give your buyer an out just in case, right? J, interest-bearing account, because what do we know? All deposits are to be held in a non-interest-bearing account, right? Well, if for some reason somebody wants the money to be held in an interest-bearing account, then you can put that in there and you can specify who gets the money, right? Like, you want to do that, you can. I think there's some laws, that kind of go with that. So again, me not being an attorney, I'm going to tell you, if you are going to put money into an interest-bearing account, probably consult with an attorney. I'm not even sure most title companies would even do that for you, because who the heck wants that accounting nightmare? I can tell you that I certainly do not, right? M, defective drywall. This was big, Chinese drywall. You'd walk into the places and they would, the home would smell like sulfur. A lot of new construction that took place in, the early 2000s kind of came up with that. I've not seen a defective drywall home probably a decade, maybe even longer than a decade. You smell them. You can smell them. Actually, you do see them because it causes the copper pipes to corrode as well. So if there's copper, you'll see it as well. But if you suspect it, if you smell sulfur, like a sulfur smell, or you see black around, electrical, like copper electrical, or black around pipe, copper pipes, then you may be suspected. Maybe you would use that, right? And coastal construction control line. This is, from what I understand about this one, pretty much properties that are east of A1A, right? And basically it just says that, you know, the property can, you know, go away because of, you know, erosion, right, over time. So if you're anywhere west of, I don't know, A1A, west of Federal Highway for sure, west of the Intracoastal for sure, like this probably doesn't apply, but might not be a bad idea to figure out where this coastal construction control line is if you're dealing with a far east property. Installation disclosure for new residents. So this is just going to tell you, you know, what type of insulation is in on a new residence. Maybe if it's, you know, a total flip, they gut job, they ripped the walls, they ripped everything out. You probably could, you probably ask for this because it's kind of new, right? But if it's, you know, a homeowner that's lived there for 20 years and, you know, they bought it from somebody else, they're probably not going to know this. Like manufacturer R value. Do you even know that about your house? Probably not. So don't expect a homeowner to know that, right? Because quite frankly, I don't even know that about my own house. So I wouldn't expect anybody to know that about their house. Maybe some of it, I don't know. All right, P, we all know what this is, right? Q, we also all know what that is. P and Q, probably good to have these also filled out at a listing appointment. P especially, right? Say it's the same thing as the association riders, right? Once you make a change to the document, what do you need to do? You need to go in and get an initial from the other side to acknowledge and approve those changes. So if the buyer's agent sends that over with, you know, with the contract, and you know they've already signed, you know, the buyer's already initialed and signed in their areas, and then the seller comes in and they check a box, or maybe they write something in there. That's a change, and it's still got to go back to the buyer and get the initials anyway. So as a listing agent, just fill that out. And don't forget, if you are a buyer's agent, did your buyer receive the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home? That's like in all of the contract stuff, right? You could find that in Form Simplicity. You could find that in Transaction Desk. You probably find it maybe in Loop. I don't know. Back office with our company, it's in there. But if you have a buyer and they're filling this out, and then you're going to have them initial paragraph D, then make sure that that they actually did receive that. You know, just make sure that you know you're doing the things that you're saying you're doing in the contract. And then F, paragraph F. This is for the licensee. Make sure that you as the this listing agent actually do that. Buyer's agent, listing agent, or selling agent, listing agent. Yeah, you do have a role to play in this as well. So just make sure that you know you're going through that, right? And then Q, housing for older persons. 62 years or 55 years. I actually have never seen one for 62 years. But apparently they must be out there somewhere in the state of Florida. Most of them are 55 years old, right? But that one, you also could have that box checked. Sometimes the buyer's agent will just know and they'll check the right box because most of them are 55 plus. But that's one that you could also provide up front, right? All right, R, S, T, U, V, and W. Again, we're going to go through some of these relatively quick, and then after this, we'll get to some of the more interesting ones. Rezoning contingency. I've never run into this one ever in the course, but basically, I guess you know this. I don't know. This just covers if you want to, if it's not zoned where you want it to be. You know, if you're buying a huge piece of land and you want to get that zoned, you know, it's agricultural, and you want to build some townhouses on there, well, you could put a contingency in there that would happen. And you know, how is that going to happen? So, S, lease purchase, lease option. You run into this again. If you've been doing this for any amount of time, this comes up in conversations. This is how you would do it, right? And again, you know, with options, you're going to want an attorney involved as well, especially if you're on the buyer's side. You're going to want an attorney to draft up these agreements and make sure that your customer fully understands the terms of this thing, because they, maybe they stand to lose something if they're not able to exercise that option, by that certain time. So just, make sure that, that your buyer really understands. And the best way to do that, hire an attorney, right? Post-occupancy closing by seller. These next two are a little bit tough. Yeah. So U and V, or U and T. Sorry, we have these backwards here. Let's go to T first. Pre-closing occupancy by buyer. It's exactly how it sounds, right? To me, it's not a good idea. I've done these in the past, and we run into problems. Not all the time, but what happens when the buyer's financing gets squirrely, right? What happens if things just start to not looking like they're going to close? Well, the buyer's already in there. I don't recommend it. I do not recommend pre-occupancy closing by the buyer. You could do it if you want, because this is here for a reason. Obviously, people do it, but I do not think it's a good idea. Post-closing occupancy by seller. Uh-oh. Am I frozen?
Yes.
Can you hear me at least? There.
Cutting in and out.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I forgot to turn my VPN off. Okay, too late now, because it'll cause a big problem. All right, let's see if this works now. Can you see me now?
It works.
Okay, perfect. Post-closing occupancy by seller. Not as bad of an idea as pre-closing occupancy by the buyer, but sometimes also not a really great idea. That is also something that can turn into an issue. If the seller, I've seen it where things don't work out for the seller how they thought that they would within the amount of time, and then the buyer wants the place, seller still has nowhere to go. It's all, knock on wood, but it's always worked out in the end for me. But again, maybe not the best idea to do if you can avoid it, right? Like, just go stay in an Airbnb, dude. Put your stuff in storage, go into an Airbnb, right? Like, that would be my suggestion, right? All right. So jumping ahead now, V, sale of buyer's property. Simple enough, right? This is another contingency. If the buyer has a property that they need to sell prior to closing in order to purchase this property, then this is the addendum that you're going to use. W, backup contract. So this is your legitimate backup contract writer. If you don't have this signed by the seller along with your contract, then you do not have a legitimate backup contract. If the listing agent says, I'll hold this as a backup, and if something happens, I'll give you a call, you do not have a legitimate backup contract. Just know that, right? This must be signed or initialed in addition to the contract. This is how you have a legitimate backup offer. If you don't have this, you don't have a legitimate offer, and they are bound by no terms. They are bound by no terms to what am I trying to say here? They are bound by no terms to honor your contract or put that one into first position, based on what they told you. So just keep that in mind. All right, so moving along here, kick-out clause, X, Y, Z, double A, double B, and then we'll be getting to some of the more interesting, newer addenda that have been coming out. So kick-out clause, this is just, it's a negotiating tool that you can use, if you want to make your offer look a little bit better, basically that, they're willing to, pay up to a certain amount, right? Up to a certain amount, over and above, but then, they've got to lock themselves in with that one. Z, buyer's attorney approval, exactly how it sounds. The attorney has to approve it, right? Oh, Y, seller's attorney approval. Again, exactly how it sounds, right? So Y and Z, it's contingent on approval of an attorney. Double A is important for us in this call, because if we are a real estate licensee, whether it's active or inactive, we do have to disclose that, because somehow they feel like that gives us an unfair advantage when we're negotiating. I don't know how it gives us any advantage or disadvantage if they know about it, but that's what the state says. BB means you're going to arbitrate, binding arbitration if there's a problem, right? So that's already referenced in paragraph 16B. You know, but this you know, binds you to arbitration. It's completely binding, right? You have to go with it, right? CC, Miami-Dade County Special Taxing District. I really don't actually know what this one is, but I believe what it is they're doing improvements in certain parts of Miami-Dade. So this would just be the disclosure of it, and then what type of improvement these taxes are being charged for, whether maybe it's roads, maybe it's, I don't know, fire hydrants, maybe it's curbs, sidewalks, don't really know. DD, seasonal vacation rentals after closing. So this is if you're selling an Airbnb property and they've already got bookings that they're not willing to cancel, right? So Airbnb, Vrbo, any of those vacation sites, if there are people that are going to be staying after closing, this is where you would want to disclose that. EE, property assessed clean energy disclosure, PACE, right? So these are the loans that come in. They'll do your windows, they'll do your door, your roof, your AC, right? You're disclosing that. All right. FF. Let me look here real quick now. FF. All right. So compensation agreements. We actually have a flow chart that we're going to show you at the end of this, so you'll know kind of how to deal with this, right? So credit related to buyer's broker, right? So this is important to understand. So it starts with two contracts, right? Two contracts, and they're both exclusive. They should be. The exclusive right to sell, the listing contract, and the exclusive buyer agency agreement, right? So yeah, here we go. That's a good idea. Let's just go straight to the flow chart. So this flow chart's going to tell you what you need, right? Now, if you see in the top left, you see the seller, right? And you see in the bottom right, you see the buyer. So if you have the seller, you're going to start up there. If you have the buyer, you're going to start down here at the bottom. And this tells you, what documents you need. So seller starts with listing agreement, right? So number one, pays seller's broker and buyer's broker separately. So is the seller going to pay the buyer's broker? Like, okay, so when you're filling out the listing agreement, it'll say, I'm collecting X number of commission, right? And then a couple paragraphs down, it's going to say, out of the commission that I'm collecting, I'm agreeing to pay X number to the buyer's agent, right? Or the buyer's brokerage. If you put a 0 there, right, then it's that one right there, right? Pays seller's broker and buyer's broker separately. If you put the total commission, you say, you're going to pay my brokerage is going to pay the other brokerage, right? So that's a different agreement, right? So let's go back real quick. Here, right? Compensation to seller. So, FF. FF means that actually that the buyer, during the agreement here, that the buyer's, the seller is actually compensating the buyer on the amount that, and this is all like, let's see, it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another, right? So it's not necessarily about the final number, because at the end of the day, the final number will be the final number. And this is hard to explain because I can't say numbers, right? We can't because you know, we're not allowed to you know, we can't price fix and all that. So it's hard for me to give this example, but you've got the, you know, the big top number. So let's say the seller were to pay the big top number, and out of that, they're gonna pay the listing broker, and the listing broker is going to pay the buyer's broker. But there's also, you've got, you know, the top number, but it's different because out of the top number, the seller's going to pay the listing broker, and then the seller's also going to pay the buyer, who then pays the buyer's broker, right? So FF would be if the seller's paying the buyer and the buyer's broker. Is that right, Irene? Irene's actually the contract master here with these ones.
Yeah. So technically the seller is actually crediting the buyer so that the buyer can actually pay the buyer's broker. So it's more of like the flow of the money itself. But it's just
so it's all about the flow of the money. That's why we have this flow chart right here, because at the end of the day, the big top number is probably the big top number no matter what. But what you need to understand as a listing agent is, if you put in your listing contract that you're collecting a big number, and that out of that big number, you're the seller's up here with this big number, right? The total commission. And out of that, the seller is going to pay all of that to the listing broker, right? And then that listing broker is actually going to compensate the buyer's broker, right? That would be GG, right? So you need rider GG. But if you've got the total commission up, actually it's a smaller commission, right? It's actually a smaller commission, because out of this smaller commission, the seller is only agreeing to pay the listing agent. And there's no agreement to pay the buyer's agent. But later on in the negotiations, right, the buyer comes along, and the buyer has the buyer has agreed to pay, right? So now you got the buyer up here that's agreed to pay their broker X percentage. Well, now they're obligated to pay that, but the seller has not agreed to pay anybody on the buyer side. The seller's only agreed to pay on the seller's side, right? So now the buyer is up here paying this to the buyer's side, but the buyer doesn't want to pay it. So that agreement now brings in rider SF, right? And I hope this is making sense. I really hope this is making sense. So what you do not need to do, you do not need to share, if you're on the buyer side, you do not need to share the buyer agency agreement. Do not send that with your contract. That's only between you and the buyer. That's what the buyer's agreed to pay you. That's not what the seller's agreed to pay you. That's not what the broker's agreed to pay you. Nobody's agreed to pay you that, right? Only the buyer has agreed to pay you that. And if you call the agent, which I don't, if I'm working with the buyer, I don't even call the listing agent and ask what commission is, because I'm just going to send over rider GG, right, and say that I'm collecting my nice big commission amount, right, my full commission amount, and then they can come back and they can negotiate that later, right? But that's what's going along with that. So GG, FF, understand the difference. But if you do, let's say you do call the listing agent, hey, what's the seller paying? They're not paying anything to the buyer's agent. All right, I'm going to send you an offer anyway with rider FF, because I in the listing contract, the agent just told me that they're not paying anything. So GG doesn't apply because they've not already agreed to pay. So now it's FF, because now this is an additional an additional negotiation, right? So keep these in mind. GG and FF, these contracts, you do not need to write, you know, compensation agreement. Right now, you also have the broker to brokers. Right now, those are different types of compensation agreements. Right, seller to buyer's broker. right? So keep these in mind when you're on GG, when you're on FF, when you're looking at this. Again, it's flow of money. The money doesn't necessarily change. The total commission amount is here, right? It's just a matter of how is it being paid, into who and by when. It comes in right here, right? I hope that makes sense. But just keep in mind your exclusive buyer agency agreement. You don't need to put that in there, right? Compensation agreement. If with this, so what GG and FF do actually, they tie the compensation agreement to this contract, right? So because I don't know, Irene, do we have the compensation agreements in here? So because GG and FF are contingent upon executing a compensation agreement. That's what that is. So right here, this contract is contingent upon seller's broker and buyer's broker, or seller and buyer's broker executing a compensation agreement. So you don't go into other on the addenda page of the contract, was it page 11? You don't go to other and type in compensation agreement. GG and FF tie that in there together, right? So, and then this gives us time to negotiate it outside of the actual sales contract, right? It gives it 3 days. It gives us 3 days to get our compensation figured out, just in case it turns ugly. But it's really important to understand that you don't need to write compensation agreement in the contract. It's already going to be tied in there with GG and FF. Right? You want to write it in there anyway? Go ahead, right? Again, I don't see anything wrong with redundancy. And again, this is my opinion on how I believe contracts should be filled out, or how they need to be filled out. Again, I'm not an attorney. I did not create these documents. These are not documents, with this company. Fill them out, do whatever you want. I just think that if we have GG and you have the compensation agreement, that should kind of pull all of that in together. And I like to have a nice, clean contract. I don't necessarily like, redundancies unless I feel that for some reason it's actually necessary. But GG and FF will pull in whatever the appropriate compensation agreement is that you have. Seller's not offering compensation, then you're going to probably want to go with FF, because there's probably nothing in there, right? Seller is offering compensation. Listing agent told me what it was. And if I want more, I can still fill out a higher amount in my compensation agreement, right? But then you're going to go with GG. So hopefully that makes sense. We can share this flow chart. I think the flow chart, I know it's a little difficult to understand, but it's really the easiest way to understand this. And the only thing that you really need to know is, are you working with the buyer or the seller, right? And it'll tell you, do you need rider GG or do you need rider FF, and who's paying, who's going to be paying what in there. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, we're winding this down here. We're almost done. Flood disclosure. This is something that's fairly new. Just fill it out. The listing agents, again, this is a document. Listing agent should fill this out, because if you get to this and the buyer has signed it but there's no boxes checked, the minute that the seller comes in and checks the box, well, now they have to to change that, right? And it's really only, well, it's actually only signed by the seller anyway. So yeah, buyer doesn't even sign that. So just send that ahead of time. Put it in forms. Doesn't really matter, right? So all right, that's all we have. 1 o'clock. Hit it on the head. Call to action. Read and understand these things. Right? This was a very fast overview of these documents, but this is by no means a comprehensive review of these documents. If you have questions, you can call me. You can reach out to me. We're in the lobby room. You can reach out to the admin, or you could always go to the Florida Realtors Legal Hotline, where any real estate agent is able to go and ask questions by a licensed attorney that understands these things. QR code, phone number, it's all right here. website link, but you can't click it because this is just a video for you. Lisa, you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick. Do we need the compensation rider even though we have a broker-to-broker compensation agreement?
Well, that's what it is. It would be the broker-to-broker is the compensation. It's either broker-to-broker or seller to buyer. Yeah, seller to buyer's broker. So
Okay, so we don't have to necessarily have the rider if we've got the broker-to-broker compensation?
I guess you wouldn't need it if you already have it signed, but the rider is what ties that compensation agreement to the contract.
Okay.
So
you're saying it's better to have these riders?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you don't have to write compensation agreement in the others part of the box. This ties the compensation agreement to the contract. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, yeah, I understand. So, but you send this over when you send the initial offer. Is that what you're saying?
The initial offer, yes, with FF or GG, along with the compensation agreement.
Okay, so along with the broker-to-broker compensation agreement?
Broker-to-broker or seller to buyer's broker.
Okay, all right, so, okay.
Yeah, so that's where FF or GG comes in. GG is if the seller is paying the listing agent who pays the listing broker who pays the buyer's broker, or if the seller is just going to pay the buyer's broker directly.
Okay.
Which then offsets, right, what the buyer, no matter what, they offset what the buyer has agreed to in the buyer agency.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, if you're filling out a buyer's contract and you have questions, just pop in the lobby. We're happy to help. Again, to me, it's stupid. It's like the stupidest thing ever that we have to do this. I think it's just, you know, they took something that was like, that had been around for decades, if maybe, I don't know, centuries, I don't know how long we've been able to advertise commissions, and then they overly complicated it. So now you've got to figure out who's going to pay what to who, and you know, how does that money actually get there? But at the end of the day, you're still ending up with the same number, right? All because they want to prove a point that broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Literally all it is, right? All right. Any other questions? All right, that's it. Well, I hope that made sense. I feel like we all got a little lost at the end, but I think we brought it in full circle. So, all right, awesome. Well, Roundtable is going to be next week. It says October 21st, but well, that would be last week, wouldn't it? So whatever the date next week is when our Roundtable is going to be. I guess that would be November 4th. So hopefully we will see you guys there. I wasn't able to make it for the last one, but I want to show some AI stuff, just a couple things in AI we've been kind of working on, some things we're working on in the office to try to make AI a little more able to work for us. I don't know if you guys know, but everybody has their Gmail or their company office email is upgraded with Google Gemini. So, you know, there's a lot of things you can do in there, which are pretty cool. So, but that's it. And then our next Ask the Broker is going to be November 11th. I don't even know what we're going to talk about, but I guess we'll figure it out then. So, all right, awesome. Thank you guys for sticking around, and we'll see you all later.